My name is Sally Jacobs. I am the archivist for the McCormick International Harvester Collection at the Wisconsin Historical Society. Today is June 18th, 2016, and I am here at the Racine County Fairgrounds for the Red Power Roundup. I'm sitting with William Reedy, who is a longtime collector and is here to talk about his collection and the research that he does about his collection.
Okay, well, I guess to begin with, how I got into collecting International Harvester was that I grew up with International Harvester in the northeast quadrant of Iowa and developed a particular interest in the older equipment, probably because we used older equipment.
Nice, yeah, sure.
So I really began my collecting, I guess, in 1963 because that was when I got my first job and had a little bit of money.
Oh,
I could
nice.
start
I
buying
like that.
things.
Yes. You know, some kids buy records.
Yes.
I love it.
Well, there was a neighbor who had an old F-12 sitting out in the grove. Well, that tractor. So inquired about it. Oh yes, yeah, I'd definitely sell that. Haven't used it for years. I'd like to have $25 for it.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
So it had steel on the rear and rubber on the front, and of course
Oh,
the
wow.
rubber was all rotted away.
Sure.
So I went to another person who had a lot of F-12 parts, and I got a front steel wheels on it.
Oh, so both, yeah.
So I went over and took off the bolster pedestal with the rubber and put the steel. Then I tinkered around with the tractor for a little while, got it started, and drove home.
On the road with the steel wheels?
On the road. It was a ride.
Oh, my goodness.
But from there on, well, I was infected at that.
I know what you mean, right?
And
There's
so
no going back.
I saw a 10-12 a dealer's lot, so I had to go. And it just went from
Well, I love that you knew where to go already to get parts.
there. Well, I noticed those things as I travel around the country.
Yeah.
So from there, why? Then I kept buying tractors, collecting tractors for some time. I don't buy once in a while I go to resist.
I think I'm going to translate that as I'm sure I wasn't going to buy tractors anymore.
Well, I'm getting better. I haven't bought one for almost.
Oh, that's nice.
But I also started collecting a lot of smaller items, implements, sort of thing, and I got into international tools.
Oh, wow.
And I guess right now, very few people I know of that's really into International Harvester sickle sharpeners.
Oh, my goodness. That's a little obscure, even for the
Yes.
Red Power Roundup.
And well, I'm vending here.
Yeah.
Because as I get spares, I vend them. But each of the, not each, but 4 of the companies that formed International Harvester brought a sickle sharpener in merger.
Oh, right.
They were all different patents, and the thing about them is they have a nice set of gears and eccentrics and so on. You know,
Sure.
a fascinating mechanism.
Absolutely.
And not only is it a fascinating mechanism, but it occurred to me, you know, the person who devised this thing, kind of starting from scratch.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's interesting the different methods they came up with.
So which one won? I mean, or did they just continue all of them until
no,
that
they
wasn't how
didn't
you did it?
Well,
anymore?
they continued McCormick-Deering, Plano, Champion.
Mhm.
Well, those were the ones that had them.
Sure.
Milwaukee did not have them.
Huh.
As far as I know, and Osborn did not.
Okay.
But as the merger was completed,
Mhm.
Milwaukee and Osborn got one too. They were assigned the Deering pattern,
Oh.
except their name was on it instead of Deering.
Right. So, in your opinion, was the Deering the best one?
Oh, not necessarily. Probably not.
How did they choose?
Well,
And it's well, who knows? We can't get in their brains.
The McCormick was probably the best design, and it was the one that ultimately survived past World War II in production.
Oh.
Uh,
I'm thinking, so why would they assign the new, the two companies after the merger who didn't have one, they assigned the Deering one. It must have just been because it was easier from a business perspective, right?
Yeah,
it was less
perhaps.
expensive. It
Yeah,
was
it's hard
easier
to
to
say
ship.
why,
It
or
was easier to
perhaps-
scale up. Who knows, right?
Perhaps McCormick was possessive of his design.
Oh.
And McCormick was like that.
You're right, because it would have been putting someone else's name on it. I bet he would not have liked that at all.
Well, in the course of all this, of course, then I began researching the companies and the early acquisitions
Mm-hmm.
and development of each of the 5 companies and early acquisitions. There were several right away
Mm-hmm.
within a year of the merger. They
Right.
purchased Osborn almost immediately, and they purchased Harvester, and they purchased Stone right away. So these companies each have their own histories,
Right.
and so I started looking into all of these things. Really, as I've gotten older and unable or unwilling to handle the really heavy stuff.
I hear you. There are young people to do that for you, thank goodness.
I have concentrated more on my research into the genesis and development of International Harvester. And that
Fantastic.
takes me into the predecessor company.
Right.
Well, doing this, not only do I get a lot of information assembled, I meet some really fascinating people.
Bet you do.
And I've come to the point where I feel that I know the Marsh brothers and Marcus Stewart and William Deering and
Right.
Cyrus McCormick and Cyrenus Wheeler. I almost feel that I know them personally.
Right. You should write a I don't know, a book, a play, a short story, something, or just write. Do you feel like do their personalities come across at all? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Especially in comparison to each other. You got to
Yeah.
imagine that.
Well,
they
I
were,
mentioned that McCormick was very possessive of his
Yes.
products. Of course,
Right.
Cyrus McCormick was dead by this time, but earlier, he had
right.
a proprietary feeling toward the Reaper, and
Yes.
he
Including-
was genuinely offended when other people would make Reapers.
Oh my goodness. I'm gonna giggle about that for a long time because that's a good way to put it. Right, as if I did it. It's done.
Yeah, it was his baby.
Just
and
everybody else just stop.
Yeah, he really was offended by that idea. But many people produced Reapers, of course, after his came out. But
Sure.
horrified at the idea to do this.
How could they possibly do that?
And or William Deering. William Deering was the consummate businessman.
Oh, really? That was his
He
strength.
came into this in 1870, knowing absolutely nothing of agriculture. He didn't have a clue. As a matter of fact, he commented within a year or so, a short time after he invested in it and started producing, he mentioned to someone, well, I don't know anything about farming. And matter of fact, I'm not quite sure what our product looks like.
But he just saw, the technology was
Yes,
it was a safe investment.
He could see things that were good investments or a good product that's going to take off. See,
and you can understand that this is an efficiency thing, even if you don't understand the mechanics of agriculture, right? It does it faster and better. Like, okay, done. Don't even show me a picture or drawing. I don't care.
See, William Deering was a dry goods merchant, essentially.
Oh, okay.
He lived in Maine, and he made his fortune selling uniforms to the Union Army in the Civil War.
Then.
Well, after the war, he decided to move west, or to go west looking for investment opportunities. Well, he had an old friend named Gammon, had been in Maine but had now gone to Illinois. And so Gammon was in Chicago. Well, William Deering sent him a letter saying that he was coming to Chicago at such and so Gammon was going to meet him at the train. Well, Gammon, in the meantime, had invested, although he didn't have a lot of money, he had invested in the Marsh Brothers
Okay.
harvester.
Sure.
And the Marsh harvester had been mechanically, it was working, it was successful, but nobody involved with it had any money.
Oh, yeah, that's
And so their
that's a
production
problem
was
when
a
it
real
comes to
problem.
production. Yes. Right.
Well, William
Yeah.
Deering came to Chicago, and he told Gammon, I came here to look around at Chicago real estate. He said, I think I will invest in Chicago real estate because I believe that town's going to grow.
Might just.
And Gammon said, well, before you make that investment, let me show you something. So they went out to their little plant at Plano, and Gammon explained what it was and what they were doing. Of course, it was all Greek to Deering.
Right.
But Deering said, well, you know, that does sound like a good idea.
I mean,
And
it makes sense, right?
so he invested $40,000 into it, which was a huge amount of money. at
Huge
the
sum
time.
back then. Wow, he must have had a very successful dry goods store.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, the uniforms. That's a.
Yeah, that well,
Closed.
the volume would have been enormous.
That's what I mean, right? And if you have it, well, he couldn't have been the only one. Maybe.
Probably not.
Yeah. Very good deal. Yes.
So it was Milliken and Deering.
Hmm.
I believe part of that business is still running, but Deering cashed out of it when he went west.
Okay.
At any rate, he thought, well, this was a good idea, and putting this money into it, of course, allowed them to ramp up production.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Bigger share of the market.
yes, and so essentially he bought out the Marsh Brothers' interest in it. Gammon was already a partner in it, and Marcus Steward was a partner in it. Marcus Steward was a partner going way back to when the Marsh Brothers started working on developing the harvester.
Okay. Sure.
He was a neighbor.
Oh wow.
The Marsh Brothers started this on their farm, in their farm shop, with an idea, and spent some years perfecting it. And Marcus Steward was a neighbor who would come over and kind of help them with it and offer suggestions. And then when they really hit a knotty problem, Marcus Steward said, well, you go to Plano. There's a guy there named John Hollister who is just a master mechanic, and he can fix anything and make anything work. So they did.
Yeah.
And among them, they got the thing rolling. So the Marshes had almost given up by 1870 because of no money and the difficulty in marketing.
Yep.
And terrible resistance from all the reaper people. Did not want a competing product in here.
Yes.
So anyway, Deering invested his money. Again, being the consummate businessman, he said, now I have my money in it. We're going to sell them.
Right. Exactly. We're gonna make some money.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so within a couple of years, they were just selling thousands and
Wow.
thousands of them. Cyrus McCormick, who had built the whole idea, said, you know, we've got to make one of these.
Well, that's good to know he was at least that flexible. He could, you can only ignore that
Yes.
for so long.
But Deering was really impressive in his acumen.
He did have business acumen, clearly,
Yes,
right?
and
right.
marketing.
Yep. And that is, sales is key.
Well, by the time McCormick came on the market with the Marsh Harvester,
Yeah.
Deering had already been talking to some other people, and had by then a binding mechanism for wire had been developed.
Oh, right. But there was a problem with that.
Yes, there was,
Huh?
but Deering came out with the wire binder
Yeah.
when McCormick was just catching up to him with the Marsh Harvester.
Oh, right. That is
Well,
a couple steps ahead.
The wire binder sold like hotcakes at first, and
Yeah.
within a couple of years, McCormick says, we've got to make one of those, which he did. But then it was falling out of favor because of problems with the wire and so on.
Yeah. And I mean, I know what it is, but why don't you say what the problem was with the wire
Well,
and
two
the feed?
problems with the wire.
Yeah.
The worst problem was that it would get, bits of wire would get into the grain, and if the cattle ingested it, it would kill them. If a miller bought the grain, it would mess up his grinding stones.
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
it just,
Terrible.
if they could have kept the fragments out of it, it would have been okay. But,
Today we have that kind of control over
Yeah.
metal. We did not
Right.
really back then.
but while this was going on, and McCormick jumps in and starts making one, in the meantime, John Appleby had perfected the twine knotter,
Right, because it's all about the knotting.
and Deering caught wind of it. So immediately he went to visit John Appleby.
Yeah.
John Appleby went through showed him one and how it worked and all of this, and so Deering looked at this a little bit and turned to Appleby and said, "Well, partner,
Nice.
I think we have a winner."
I mean, I do not have an engineering mind, but when I think about the challenge of, tying something tight and then knotting it with a machine, I think, no
Well,
way.
With wire, it's relatively
Right, 'cause
easy.
you just have to twist it. Right, exactly. But tying a knot is pretty, do
Yeah.
they have robots who tie knots? I'm sure they do by now. But
And
that seems like
Appleby
quite
had
a
spent 20 years experimenting and kicking
long
this around in
time.
his mind before he
Yeah.
got something that would.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. That is a tough problem to solve mechanically.
So by the time McCormick really hit the market with the wire binder, Deering hit the market with the twine binder.
Interesting, once again, yes.
And that time McCormick was much quicker on the trigger. Within a year, he had one out.
Well, see, I think he learned his lesson.
Yes.
Yeah, that you can't resist.
Yeah, and
You want to stay on top. You can't lean on your initial product.
yeah, he had presumed that the paper was the.
And everything was done.
So the two men fought back and forth
Oh, yes.
in the market for
Oh,
years.
yes.
And went this way that every time McCormick thought things were settled, Deering would come up with something new. So that was Deering's great promotion, not that or great contribution, not that he knew anything about it or invented anything, but he knew a winner when he saw one and
Sure.
knew how to market the thing.
Yep.
So the two of them battled in the dominance of the industry for some years. Well, of course, other people came in, many people had been making reapers, and a lot of them switched over to binders.
Yeah.
A group after Deering moved his plant from Plano to Chicago in 1880.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a couple of things happened in 1880. Gammon dropped out. It was Gammon and Deering. Steward had dropped out in 73 or 4.
Okay.
And then it was Gammon and Deering through the 70s. Well, in 1880, when Deering was preparing the twine knotter, he did this secretly. He locked up his factory so no outsiders come in and nose around. And during the winter of 1879-80, he secretly produced 3,000 twine binders.
Where'd he put them?
Yeah, he stored them in his warehouses.
Jeez, on the locked, secret, secure.
The other problem
Warehouse.
with twine binders, many people had experimented, and the problem was the twine.
Oh, right.
There was nothing on the market that was really suitable. Well, Deering had determined what would be a suitable twine.
Which
Couldn't
was
buy any. So he went to Philadelphia,
okay.
Fittler's cordage mill. Fittler is also still in business, I believe.
Interesting.
But Fittler made rope and so on. And in
Wait, how do you
Philadelphia-
spell that? Is it a D or a T?
Fitler, I believe. Fittler's big business, of course, was making rope for ships.
Well, that would make sense given their location, right?
But he had the largest cordage mill in the country, so Deering went to see him to see if he could produce this kind of twine,
Which is
Well-
much more fine and
Yeah, it was a single strand manila is what he was looking.
okay.
So he talked to Fittler, he said, "This is what I need." And Fittler says, "Well, I could produce such a twine, but I'd have to buy some new equipment, and I
Yeah.
can't do that for a small order."
Right.
And Deering said, "Well, I understand where you're coming from, but I don't want to make too big an order either because it's a somewhat experimental thing."
Right.
And he said, "I was thinking of an initial order of maybe 10 carloads." And Fittler said, 10 carloads, I'll buy the equipment.
Yes. That's great. Right. Well, one person's small is another person's
Yes.
large, right?
So in the spring of 1880, then Deering made a public announcement.
Okay.
We have for sale 3,000 twine binders that will work, and we have 10 carloads of twine that will work. Well, they sold out almost immediately.
I would imagine. Do you know the mechanism of getting the word out? I mean, how did you? I mean,
He
were there?
advertised in the trade papers and the
Okay.
agricultural
Yeah.
papers. So it just took
And that
off.
was definitely that was very astute business to have those ready to go because
Yes.
people don't get. I mean, people can get excited about an idea, but that's not the same thing as
Yeah, and
buy it now. We only have 3,000.
and this is something that people were looking for.
They want it already, right? Do
So-
you want to tie each of those knots yourself?
But again, this kind of gives us an idea of the business sense that Deering
Yeah.
had.
Oh, there's no question. Right.
Of course, McCormick was absolutely
I bet he was not happy. But, as the McCormick archivist, I know they had a plantation in Cuba just
Oh,
for the twine material was Henneken.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And it got
Yes.
taken over. The soldiers with guns showed up and
Hmm. Yes, these people, Deering and McCormick both, but Deering very especially, was nailing down his sources of raw material. And
Yeah.
this was another thing that brought about the merger in 1902. McCormick was becoming a little frightened because Deering owned iron mines in
Yes.
Minnesota,
that's right.
and Deering owned thousands of acres of forest in Wisconsin, so he could supply himself with everything.
And it's true. I mean, eventually, right? McCormick IH was very well vertically integrated.
Yes,
yeah,
but
they
most of
controlled
that
each-
was because Deering had seen ahead and done this, and when the merger happened, all of this came into International Harvester.
interesting.
Deering also, just before the merger, had set up the Wisconsin Steel.
Yep, indeed.
So once
Yeah.
International Harvester was formed, they had everything they needed.
Right, control it from beginning to end. Right, which is powerful.
Yes, but that was all Deering's doing.
Interesting.
McCormick hadn't thought of that.
Huh. I bet he'd tell you that he did if he were here. All right, there's one quirky thing about this is that I'm worried that it's going to cut out at 29 minutes.
Oh,
And we're at 22 and a half. So, is there one more story you want to tell before we?
well, some of the
Wrap it up?
people I mentioned, like
Yeah.
John Hollister and Marcus Steward,
Uh-huh.
when Deering moved to Chicago in 1880,
Mhm.
Gammon dropped out because
Oh, right.
the gamble on the 3,000 units scared him to death, and he said, I can't stand this.
I just can't take it anymore.
And so
Oh, I
they-
bet he regretted that.
the plant in Plano, then they moved out,
Yeah.
and a new company was formed at Plano called the Plano Harvester Company by Marcus Stewart, John Hollister, and some of these people who had been in it from way
Oh.
back. And of course, Plano was one of the 5 companies that were national.
Right.
Too.
Yep.
But researching
interesting.
all of this is
Yeah.
just fascinating. You get to know these people, what they
Right.
do, how they do it.
How they're similar but also really different, right? How it seems like they're all doing the same thing, but
Yes,
they're kind
and
of
some
not.
of the sources.
Yeah.
One of my best sources
Yeah.
is a book by John F. Stewart,
Uh-huh.
who was the son of Marcus Stewart.
Oh, yeah.
And as a teenager, he was involved with the development of the Marsh Harvester at the neighbor's place. He was then in the Union Army in the Civil War, and after the Army, he came back and joined them again.
Mhm.
Well, then John F. Stewart proceeded later to be the chief engineer for Deering Harvester Company. And then when International was formed, John F. Stewart was a key part of International Harvester Engineering.
Right.
Well, about 1910, John F. Stewart wrote his wonderful source of it.
What was the year again? Sorry, the year that he wrote his memoirs.
Around 1910, 1909 or 10 somewhere. I think it's called The Story of the Reaper, but I'm not sure what's the name of it. At any rate, I managed to pick up a copy of that book. And several of these people who were in there early did write their book or memoir.
Mhm.
Or, one I've just come upon was a book which was actually the transcription of a speech
Oh, sure, that happened quite a bit, right?
by Cyrus Wheeler.
Oh,
And his was entitled Inventors and Inventions of Cayuga County. Well, this is the whole Osborn background.
wow.
And it was a limited edition of only 100 copies or so.
And it might have been sold at the lecture.
It was a lecture initially.
But do you know what I mean? The printed copies might have been for sale at the lecture itself.
yes.
You know what I mean? If he prepared them ahead of
Oh
time.
no, it was.
No?
It came out a year or two after.
Oh, okay, so it was after the fact. Right.
But it was very limited edition,
Yeah,
only
that's
100
small.
copies or so. But I have found that one of those 100 copies is in the possession of the Wisconsin Historical Society.
I'm writing down titles because I'm going to check the catalog because that is a really, well, agricultural history,
Yeah.
history of technology as it relates to agriculture. That's absolutely something our library should have.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, needless to say, I did not find a copy of that, but I read it on Google.
Right. We participated in the Google Books project, and that's an excellent illustration of why. Right. So the knowledge goes to, the information goes to the person who most wants it, and will use
these
it.
original sources, fill in so many of the details
Oh,
of
yeah.
how this came about and who related to whom, and
Yep.
just fascinating to read. Each of them have their own bias.
Sure. I know. That's why I think it's fascinating, especially that you have an understanding of so many of them, which is,
Well, John F. Stewart gives a really wonderful account from the beginning, the invention of the reaper right on through. But John F. Stewart has his bias. He did not like Cyrus McCormick.
It's probably not the only one.
So,
That's
any
funny.
of these, you read
Sure.
them.
And it's just clear.
Yeah, knowing their bias.
Yeah. Right.
But another fascinating character I came into was Obed Hussey.
Oh,
You know,
please. I know the eye patch. He's in the side. Did you see Tom Clark's presentation that included about Cyrus the musical? All right, we'll talk about that once the mic's over. We've got 2 more minutes, I think, before it cuts out.
Well, Obed Hussey was a fascinating character, and he patented a reaper before Cyrus McCormick did. But Obed Hussey was one of these people with a really active mind, and he's always working on something else.
Yeah.
And once he has invented it, okay, that's enough. Let's move on to something else.
Yeah.
He didn't market.
Oh.
He marketed, but not
Right.
not with any
He was
enthusiasm.
already
because
bored
he
of
was
it.
Into
Yeah.
something else by now.
Right. That's
But again, one of those fascinating characters, and really a great inventor.
There's a
Gears
lot.
were constantly turning.
Yeah. You should write a history of the inventors around this type of equipment
Well,
with all your free time.
it's already been written, I think, just in several places.
No, but I think you have a knowledge of all of them that would come across in something that would be different than what's already out there, because it's the separate pieces that are out there.
Well, my prized possession in my International Harvester collection is a Marsh Harvester.
Nice. Wow. All right, I'm writing down a note that we're gonna have to sit down and we're gonna talk about. We didn't talk a lot of specifics about what you collect, except for your first 2.
Well, the Marsh Harvester is a Gammon, Deering, and Steward, and I calculate built in 1873. Could have been a year. Steward got out shortly after.
Right. So that is an antecedent date. That's right. It has to be before that.
And that will be on display at the Red Power Roundup in
Ooh.
2017.
Fantastic. Oh, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much, William. It's been a pleasure.
It was at the Red Power Roundup in
Was it?
Albert Lee.
Oh yeah.
That's the only place I've ever taken.
This is
but,
just the second time,
Yes.
second showing. Would be a little nervous too, but you gotta let people see it. When else are they gonna?
Well, my problem there, I took it there on an open trailer. Made me nervous.
Yeah.
Because what if it would rain? What if I'd hit
Right.
a gust? But
Right.
now I have it in an enclosed trailer.
You can breathe easy, right? Because you can't control the weather, as we all know.